Okay, so we're going to do a nice, simple, easy one today. It's a Lincolnshire wheat field with a little bit of a sunset just happening in the background. So nice and simple, and we're going to go through all the colours as we go. So this will pop up for you. Okay, so a very quick line of where the land is going to be, that's all I need. And we're going to go straight in with the colours. So a bit of water. I'll talk the colours through as we go along. Coming down to the line of the land. Make sure you get plenty of water on. I'm using a nice cotton paper, Saunders Waterford. So it should give me plenty of time as it soaks in really nicely. Okay, so I'm picking up a round number 10 brush, making sure it's clean and loading it with water. I'm going to dip into some raw sienna and I'm going to pop that raw sienna on towards the bottom of the sky. It's in that area where the sun is setting, we can see that. Rinse my brush off, dab it off, load it up with water again, and I'm going to pop into some rose. So this is permanent rose. I'll come just above the raw sienna, dip into some water again and a little bit more. If when you come on it seems a little bit strong, just add a bit more water to it and just spread it around the paper. So this is going to give a rosy glow, just really within the blue of the sky. Just nice to have an extra bit. Rinse that brush off again, load it up with water, and I'm dabbing into some cobalt blue. So I'm going to bring that in towards the top to start with and then work my way down. I'm using a sweeping motion, a sweep with a little arch, it's like a little curve. Load my brush up with water, dab in and sweep through. So I'm creating that wispiness in the sky now. I'm just going to bring it down. Keep loading my brush up with water and wisp through. At points you'll pick up a little bit of the rose, that's absolutely fine. Every sky is different. When you come down to the raw sienna, if you sweep through any of the raw sienna, I want you to do it very carefully and then only do one sweep. If you blend back and forth, you will end up with a bit of a green, which we don't want. But you can sweep through, and the cobalt blue it tends to be stronger than the raw sienna, so will, if left alone, overpower the raw sienna and then make a blue rather than a green. So in here I just want to make sure that if I take a little bit more blue around that edge of the raw sienna, it'll just give it that sense of a glow. Okay, so I rinse that brush out and I'm going to drop down to number 6. What I've got here is some Prussian blue, and that Prussian blue is neat. I'm taking a tiny bit of water into it, as much as that's on the brush. So that I've got a little bit of a thick blend, and then I'm going to come into some burnt sienna. Now you will need a good blob of the burnt sienna on the brush and take it across into that blue. And it's going to make a very dark green. You see that's quite thick there, so I dip in a little bit more water. It's nice thick green. Now so I'm going to come on, this is still nice and wet. I can see that it's wet, I've just dabbed it, it's definitely wet. And I'm going to create a nice tree line. So I'm keeping my brush upwards and I'm just going to vary the pressure. That's still a little bit on the blue side. I'm just going to take a bit more of the burnt sienna in. Vary the pressure so that I get a different tree at every point. So keeping upright I'm just dabbing as I come along this line. I'm going to get a nice row of very dark trees. Prussian blue is great for dark trees, and this is going to contrast that sky lovely. It's going to create a really nice atmosphere. If when you're coming on it's running too far, it's usually because it's a little bit too wet or your paint's a little bit too wet, so just make sure you haven't taken too much water in. I quite like a little bit of a wispy blend. I think it adds to the trees. You can take more into some if you want to make them bigger. You basically want a variety of heights. In the photograph there's a variety of heights. And as you come towards this bit, you're going to get much more lower and narrower. And keep that really low. That dark underneath is just going to really nicely contrast the light in the sky. I'm just going to leave that to settle. And I'll dry that one off. Okay, so that's nicely dry now. So we're going to come into the bottom half, which is the wheat itself, and start to get a base on for that. So, water. Again, plenty of water so it gives you plenty of time. Make sure my brush is nice and clean. Dip into the water, dip into the raw sienna. You're going to want this to be a little bit stronger than you did in the sky. But again, you're just using neat colour from the palette. You're just dipping into the water. You can take this all the way across. A little tip, if you want to make it stronger at the front, take less water in, and then that will give it a sense of distance straight away. Stronger colour at the front. Works wonders. I'm going to rinse my brush out. I'm going to dry it off. I'm going to dab in and half dab off on some kitchen towel. So my brush is wet, but not ridiculously wet. I want this colour to stay nice and strong. So this is sap green I'm coming in with now. I'm just coming along this bottom edge to start with. So there's a tiny bit of water on my brush, but I'm keeping it nice and strong at this stage. Again, tiny bit of water, nice thick colour. In fact, I'll show you how thick. You see, it's nice and thick. And then we're going to sweep in where these tracks are as well. I mean, you could draw these in if you wanted to. I've got plenty of paint on my brush here. I'm just going to sweep back. I've started at the biggest area, and I'm going to sweep backwards with the brush to create that sense of distance. Remember, it needs to taper as it goes. If you're worried about too much coming off the brush, then just dab the brush off or go to a smaller brush. So we're going to go this way. So I'm tapering in. And it's wider at the front, narrower at the back. It sort of goes that way. So it tapers one way and then the other. Make it a bit wider. So if you ever want to accentuate anything, make it wider at the front, and it'll always give it a better sense of distance. Narrower at the back. Push a little bit of a rinse. This is this darker green, so this is the burnt sienna and Prussian blue. I'm just dabbing into that. Just going to bring a little bit of a vertical line in. So I'm holding the brush about just over halfway down and just sweeping vertical. This is just to start to build up a little bit of the texture that we need to see and a bit of the height. I don't want to come too much over the raw sienna, so I'm going to try and focus this on the sap green area, which is just starting to build it up. If it's dried in places, don't worry. We're going to build into this, so it's going to take a few layers anyway. I want you to find something to indent with. I've got a knitting needle here, and what I'm going to do is just pull that knitting needle through. I'm basically drawing with a knitting needle, and where the paint is still wet, it will flow into those lines. You can start to create a really nice textural effect quite quickly. Just carrying on building this up. Starting to build that texture. You can see those lines appearing. So I'm just going to give that brush a bit of a rinse out. Just making sure I've got a little bit more water. So I've loaded my brush with water, I've taken it into the sap green. So I've just got a little bit more available. I'm just going to grab a little bit more of the raw sienna as well. You can start to build some texture. So just 2 dabs with my round number 10, and I've got like a creamy mix. So there we go. What I'm going to do is grab a natural sponge. I'm going to wet it, wring it out, and dab it off. Wet it, wring it out, dab it off again. That's because it's got green on it, and I don't want green on it yet. The dabbing it off is just taking off the excess moisture so that we don't take too much into the paint. Then I'm going to pick up some of that raw sienna, and I'm going to dab into this texture. So we're just going to start to build a little bit of texture up. At this stage it will look still quite pale. I'm going to dab a little bit into the sap green, and I'm just going to break through this bottom edge. So that is just to break up that edge that I did earlier with the brush, and that just starts to break that through. Okay, I'm going to dry this off now. It's nicely dry. Now it's all about building some additional texture, mainly with a sponge. So the first thing I'm going to do is do another layer of raw sienna. So I've just squirted some new raw sienna out, dabbing my brush in twice to the water and adding that. So I've got a nice creamy thick paint. It's not too thick. And I'm going to do the same with this new bit of burnt sienna. I know it's on a little bit of green, but we'll hardly see that. So that's 2 dabs, because I'm going to make this green after I've done some burnt sienna. I've still got a little bit of the sap green if I need it. So I'll rinse that brush off. I'm going to pick up my sponge, make sure that it's just dabbed it off a bit, and I'm going to go into the raw sienna. So this time, because it's dry, you're going to see much more texture. So I'm dabbing on and I'm moving the sponge every single time so that that texture is different. I'm not creating a pattern. I want this to all look a little bit different, and you can come over into the uprights so that you get a really nice blend. Sponging takes a little bit of practice, but it's wonderful once you get it. So you can see there's nice texture building up there. I'm going to dab into the burnt sienna. Now the burnt sienna I'm going to keep a little further forward. So I didn't rinse the sponge out in between. It's because I want that different mix in there. I'm just keeping that overlapping a little bit. I'm not going to take it too far back. Take it very lightly so that it fades in. You're looking for a gradual fade. So you don't want stripes of one colour, stripes of another. You want that gradual fade away. And if I give that a little bit of a rinse, again dab it off, I'm going to take that bit of Prussian blue into that burnt sienna. And it's eliminated the burnt sienna, which is quite common with Prussian blue. So I'm just going to take a little bit more in. I'm just going to pop it there on the palette and then just take it across bit by bit. I need a fair amount of a strong green for the bottom, but I want it to be green and not blue. Take a dab of water in. So I've just used all of that, a pea-sized blob of burnt sienna, to get that back to a nice dark green. Just give this brush a rinse. You see how important it is. With anything like Prussian blue, it just sticks within your brush. Okay, so this sponge again, what I'm going to do is turn the other way around, because I just find it easier to drag the sponge down, and then I'm going to take a little bit of that paint on there and I'm going to drag. So I'm lightly dragging the sponge. So not dabbing, dragging. It's just a nice quick way to create that grassy effect. It works great for grasses as well. So whiz back round. Let's give that a little bit of a rinse. You can come in with a, so this is my rigger, and I'm just going to pop in a few. So just into the dark green. So the sponge has mainly done the work for me. This is just building them up a little bit more. A few little wispy bits there. You can still see those lines underneath that I did with the knitting needle as well. Okay, so I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so we're on to the last stage now. What I'm going to do is take a little bit of Chinese white into a bit of raw sienna, and it's all about just creating a few lights, and you can do this in several ways. This is probably one of the easiest ways to do it, and I'm just going to dab, so I'm keeping my brush up vertically and I'm dabbing where I might want these bits of wheat to be, and I want you to break over the dark line, so we're just breaking that edge up. Getting a little bit more raw sienna into that mix so they're not all too light. That vertical is really important, just to make it look like it's wheat. And we're going to keep it just at this front section. We're not going to go back there with it. It's just all staying in this front section. I'm using a flat brush and it's about 1 centimetre, so it's just right really. You could use a smaller one. I'll just put a few lighter ones in here because I've got the lighter ones the other side now. Just got to get that balance in. And don't be afraid to come over the dark, because it just really does break up that line. Just doing a few within the dark area just breaks it up. I mean, you could add a tiny bit of rose into the mix. So if I add a tiny bit of rose, that just gives another variety of colour. Tonally, there's different ones in here. It doesn't matter if an odd one's a bit blobby, it will still work. I've now got my rigger. I'm going to come into that same mix and just do a few very light strands down from the tops of the wheat, so that you're getting a light grass appearing every now and again. Resting on my little finger. Again, it's all adding depth to this texture at the front, just building up more and more. At this point you could add a few more greens in, you could add a few more darks in as well, so if you wanted to stick a few more dark bits in just to build that up, you could. So that's just a few more darks going in. The more texture you get in this foreground, the more that it will stand forwards from that background. . if I take my round number 10 and just dab into some water and a little bit of that sap green, I am just going to sweep. What I want is a little bit of shadow, so I'm just very lightly sweeping across a few shadow lines. So I've just chosen to do that with the green. You could choose to do it with a bit of the blue as well. And this last bit is optional, but I have got here some Cern Relief by PBO. And what's quite nice is it's gold, if I can get it to come out, and you can do little grassy wheaty bits, so just squeezing it directly out of the tube, different directions. I'm just concentrating on doing the verticals at the minute, keeping it to this front section. Because it's gold, it's got a bit of a glistening highlight, which I like. So I'm just continue to squeeze it out of the tube, just put it up into the verticals, and then you can come on and create the little bits, the wiggles of the wheat. And just try and do a few where it's a little bit dark. So I tend to just wiggle left to right and just create a little bit of a wiggle. It doesn't have to be too precise, and you don't have to hit every single one. Do a little one down here, look, and you can see just a little wiggle. And that just adds an extra dimension to the texture at the front. There you go, it's all finished and dried, and I've popped the mount around so you can see that final piece of work. So you've got that really nice texture in the front with that little bit of the sparkle from the Cern Relief. But it's a very simple scene for a beginner, and those dark trees really make and lift the sky. Hope you've enjoyed it. See you next time.